Hey folks, we're here at the Red Pill Expo, and we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. He is the chief of the Congressional Task Force on EMPs. He worked for the CIA for quite a while. He was actually on the professional staff of the House, was it the Foreign Affairs Committee? Armed Services Committee, that's right, advising on WMDs. An incredible biography, and he just gave an incredible speech. Doctor, tell us about the threat of EMPs. I think most Americans are completely oblivious. Is it something we should be concerned about?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason most Americans don't know about it is because it was classified for so long. It's only in 2008 when the EMP Commission declassified most of what we know and are talking about today about EMP. An electromagnetic pulse is basically a super energetic radio wave that can destroy electronics across the entire world in the case of a solar superstorm, or across an entire continent in the case of a nuclear or non-nuclear EMP attack. And that's the thing about EMP, that one of the things that makes it such a big existential threat, because it can be made by the sun. You know, every 100 years or so, there's a solar superstorm that will generate an EMP so powerful that it would basically destroy the electronics across the entire world and end modern electronic civilization as we know it. And that would entail the loss of billions of lives, because we can't sustain the population levels that we have today without our modern electronic technologies. They're the heart of everything. Same thing is true of a nuclear EMP attack on the United States. A single weapon could take out all of our electronics. The pulse is harmless to people. It'll pass harmlessly through their bodies, but it'll destroy electric grids and other critical infrastructures, airplanes falling out of the sky, cars won't work, all the transportation networks would fail. We wouldn't be able to get water. I mean, there'd be no running water anywhere. We couldn't figure out how to keep 330 million people alive for a year with no food and water. That alone would be enough to kill off most of the population. But you also have other problems. Natural gas pipelines would explode and probably cause firestorms in cities. The 100 nuclear reactors that we have would go Fukushima after 7 days when the batteries run out, and spread radioactivity all over the place. So, you know, in the aftermath of an EMP, you're not talking about a pristine, pre-technological environment. You're talking about an environmental hell, you know, that would be very difficult to survive in. And the no food and water situation would kill off most people, result quickly in societal chaos. We know from the experience of hurricanes that it only takes about, when people miss their third meal, that's when societal cohesion starts falling apart. And when the lights go out, it encourages that even more, which is why we had the chaos in New Orleans and earlier in a blackout in New York City. You know, the veneer of civilization so quickly disappears.
Yeah, that's a pretty terrifying picture right there. So you think most Americans would die, huh?
Yeah, we estimated that up to 90% of the population would die from starvation, disease, and societal collapse. And some people think that's extreme, but it actually makes sense if you think about it a little bit. You know, because how do you support 330 million Americans? You have to go, if you think of, well, what could the country sustain before we had the electric grids? Well, back in around 1900, our population was less than 100 million people. But we supported that population because 75% of the population were farmers. You know, everybody was one generation removed from being a pioneer and basically a survivalist. The cities had a complex local farm economies that fed the cities, and we had coal-fired locomotives, you know, that connected and provided food everywhere, and gravity-fed aqueducts, okay, that provided water to the cities. None of that 19th century critical infrastructure exists anymore. You know, the horses don't exist. Only less than 2% of our people are farmers. They depend on big, complicated electrical tractors and machineries for harvesting and everything. We did an experiment with the EMP Commission where we bought a local apple and traced its history from a Washington grocery store back to Washington State, you know, where it was harvested by mechanical pickers, packaged and polished, you know, on an assembly line, transported across the country in electronic and freezer trucks, stored in a big regional food warehouse with temperature control systems, and then delivered to the local grocery store. You know, even the simple apple, you know, depends on a huge technological miracle, you know, to be delivered to consumers. And not only wouldn't we have that modern technology, but in the aftermath of an EMP, we wouldn't have the 19th century technology. So you'd have to go back to a period probably before pre-Civil War, we thought was most accurate, when our population was less than 30 million people, which is about 10% of our population today, actually fewer. And so it actually makes sense when you crunch the numbers and you say, well, what's sustainable in the aftermath of an EMP? Not much.
Wow. Well, I hear of preppers who are building themselves Faraday cages. Surely the government is taking measures to protect us from such an eventuality, right?
Surely the government is not, unfortunately. The government is taking measures to protect itself. There are even contingency plans to keep the IRS going. Yes, and members of Congress, to be protected. The White House has protected its communications and has, what do they call it? It's COG plans, continuity of government operations to keep the top elites in the Washington area alive and running, because of course we can't survive without them. That's the theory. That's the theory, but nothing to protect the American people. And we've been trying for 20 years to get the American people protected, which is, after all, the first and most fundamental constitutional duty of the government. It's why it exists. Unfortunately for those government bureaucrats, even they won't survive the super EMP weapons that have been developed by Russia, China, and North Korea, which generate field strengths that exceed the hardened Faraday cages and control systems and the like. Now, maybe there's black programs to upload, to increase, because you can survive a super EMP weapon too if you improve the standard, okay? So there may be black programs afoot to protect the government bureaucrats, but there's nothing happening to protect the American people. Oh, the Biden administration will disagree. In the infrastructure bill, they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on more studies to protect us from EMP. The people who are getting the money from those studies in the Department of Energy, have been the chief opponents of EMP protection, because they are in the pockets of the utilities who don't want to do anything. There's a rotating door between the Department of Energy and the electric utilities. And so I think that money is just going to go to line the pockets of their buddies in the Beltway bandits, and build more big McMansions. You should do a documentary someday if you want to know what happened to the billions we were spending on biological warfare preparedness, for example, and see all the mansions in Potomac, Maryland. That's where it goes. It goes to corruption, and I think that's what's going to happen. There's no excuse for not taking that money and spending it on protecting the electric grid. We've known since 1963 how to protect against EMP. The military has been doing it for select strategic nuclear systems and command and control, although even those right now wouldn't survive a super EMP attack. But we know the technology: Faraday cages, blocking devices, surge arresters. You just have to scale them up. And we as a society have proven that we can do it painlessly because we have already protected ourselves against one existential EMP threat that is so commonplace that as an electronic civilization we couldn't afford not to be protected. And it's called lightning. In the EMP world, this is called E2 EMP, and we never even talk about it because almost everything is protected against lightning. Even your personal computer, if you look at the plug, it's usually a fat plug. That's because there's a little surge arrestor in there, so that when there's a lightning strike in the power line, it'll stop the lightning from coming into your personal computer and frying it. That's exactly the same technology, except it needs to be faster and more robust to deal with these forms of super lightning, you might call them. The nuclear EMP and the solar EMP, call them super lightning. If we just increased the standards and said, you've got to be this fast, you've got to have this robustness, and all critical electronics, transformers, SCADA systems that get developed in the future, even cars could be protected. The cost of protecting a car against EMP would be $100. So there's really no excuse for us to be vulnerable to this particular existential threat. Most existential threats, all-out nuclear war, an asteroid hitting the Earth, you can't do anything about. But one of the reasons I've devoted a professional lifetime to this, as have my colleagues, which includes former directors of CIA and former White House science advisors, who are working for free as volunteers. They should be in retirement, but they're so concerned about this existential threat, they haven't retired and won't go to sleep until they get the country protected. One of the reasons we're doing that is there's no excuse to be vulnerable. We're so close. We have all the policy We've got an EMP executive order, we've got bills from Congress. If the system worked the way it should, we should already be protected. But it's not working the way it should because the government bureaucracy, the deep state, is so corrupt, that these people are not doing their jobs. And I guess we need a second American Revolution, for saving freedom and saving our lives, from existential threats like this.
So what would it cost, you suppose, to protect at least the critical infrastructure? I mean, what would you guys estimate would be a reasonable amount to spend to protect the American people and our infrastructure from this? And how do we get it done? I mean, should people call their congressman? What do you do?
Well, asking how much will it cost to protect the country from EMP is kind of like asking, well, how much does it cost to protect my house from fire? It depends upon the kind of plan you have. You can spend very little, or you can spend a lot. If you have no fire protection at all, you can greatly increase your survivability just by spending $20 on a smoke detector. You can spend more money on fire extinguishers and fire alarms. You can put in a very sophisticated fire extinguisher system in your whole house and spend a lot of money and guarantee your survival against fire. And it's sort of the same way for EMP. The EMP Commission came up with, I think, was an excellent plan that deliberately tried to keep the investment low so that the government would have no excuse not to do it. We came up with a plan where it would cost only $4 billion. $4 billion, okay? That's what it'll be.
Pocket change in Washington.
Pocket change. We told them, you're spending $5 billion every year on foreign aid to Pakistan. So if you suspended foreign aid to Pakistan for 1 year and spent it on the survival of the American people, it would be a giant step towards solving the problem. Now, that plan was not idiot-proofed, okay? It depended on the utilities and the government departments and agencies to use their brains and have a good plan. What it would do is it would protect the big transformers that we need, the 2,000 transformers, all the big generators, all the SCADA systems, the bulk power system, okay, on the electric grid. And so we would be able to quickly bring back the electric grid. If you had a good plan, before millions of Americans died of starvation. So we could quickly bring it back. And you can bring back pretty much, if your electric grid is still working, you can pretty much bring back all the other critical infrastructures too, because they depend on the electric grid. And so, we haven't even been able to get that one implemented. But there are other plans, like you could spend $20 million and harden the whole grid to military standards so that you wouldn't need a good plan. That's what we call idiot-proof. So you could have idiots working in the electric utilities and the EMP could happen, but it would just survive because you've protected practically everything. Even $20 billion is a drop in the bucket compared to what we're spending on the infrastructure bill.
4 years of foreign aid to Pakistan, we got it covered.
Right, and a lot of it wouldn't even necessarily involve spending. Lightning protection that I just described, did not cost the taxpayers anything in federal money. It's considered sunk costs. Industry, if you're building an important electronic system, or even an unimportant one, like I said, even personal computers are protected against it. It's just routinely built into it because they said, well, you've got to make it safe against lightning. And if we did that same thing, just had good standards and good engineering practices so that you're also safe against nuclear and solar EMP, it wouldn't cost the taxpayers anything in terms of tax money. It might add a few pennies to the cost of the systems that you're buying, from industry. Like I said, another $100 added to the cost of a car, so it would survive anything. Is nothing compared to the overall cost of man. In fact, we found from 50 years of experience in hardening military systems from EMP that it typically only adds about 1% to 6% to the manufacturing cost of whatever the system is. So it's a trivial cost. So the money isn't the thing, and it's never been the thing. The big problem is, well, I think there's two problems. The immediate problem, is the electric power industry is the last critical infrastructure that operates under a 19th century regulatory environment. They regulate themselves. I think political scientists call it regulatory capture, where they own the Department of Energy, they own the Federal Energy all the commissioners, and the 9 commissioners in the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission are all former lawyers and lobbyists for the electric power industry, and they know they're going back, So these guys and the EMP Commission recommended, the system is so corrupt, it won't work. The White House has to take charge. You have to sort of have a Manhattan Project for EMP, the way we had a Manhattan Project for the atomic bomb, has to be run out of the White House. And the Biden administration, to its credit, kept President Trump's EMP executive order and says they're trying to implement it. And they took our advice and established, we would have called it an EMP czar, but it's called a cyber czar for cybersecurity. And her name is Ann Neuberger. She's the person who's supposed to, be in charge of protecting our critical infrastructures. Unfortunately, she's a lawyer. Even though she was from the NSA, she served in the NSA and Cyber Command, she's a lawyer. She's not really a technical expert on any of this stuff. And when the Colonial Pipeline incident happened, which is sort of the tip of the spear, because the Russians and Chinese, they all consider EMP part of cyber warfare, not nuclear warfare, okay? But when Colonial Pipeline happened, which happened 2 weeks after Margarita Simonian, who's an unofficial spokesman, she runs RT for the Russians, and she's a friend of Putin and an unofficial spokesman. She warned us that, if we get into dust-up over Ukraine, we're going to win the cyber war. It's not going to be, World War III is going to be a cyber war, and you will lose because you're not prepared for it. And we could shut down Harlem, she said, or we could shut down the state of Florida, or we could shut down your whole country. And 2 weeks after that, they did Colonial Pipeline, and that was a bigger threat than just raising gas prices so people couldn't get gas on the East Coast. All of our military bases that are on the East Coast are indispensable to the defense of NATO. That's where we project power from to defend NATO, or if we were going to rescue Ukraine, to save Ukraine. And they depended on the Colonial Pipeline. So they were showing, they could win World War III, just like that. And you'd think, I was really hoping the administration, the Biden administration, would then say, we need a Manhattan Project. But what was their response? And this was right from Ann Neuberger. And, she said, our grand strategy is a public-private partnership, and it's really on the utilities to protect themselves. That public-private partnership thing has been tried for 20 years, and we're no safer today from EMP or cyber warfare than we were 20 years ago because it's doomed to fail. It's a doomed to fail strategy. The utilities don't understand cyber warfare. It's not their responsibility. They're right when they say it's not their responsibility to provide national security. It's the government's job. They don't have any expertise in EMP. They don't know the first thing about how to protect against it. What's needed is for the government to take the lead. This is like asking, the Kmart security guard to take on Russian Spetsnaz. It's putting their best cyber and EMP warriors up against people on our side who have no inkling about how to do defense like that. And it's a doomed to fail strategy, and it will doom us if we end up having a world war with Russia or China or maybe even North Korea, who has the ability to do EMP attacks and shut down our electric grids. That's got to change. The government has got to put on its big boy pants and take responsibility for protecting these critical infrastructures. I don't say they need to take them over, but they need to get in there and use the defense contractors, who have been protecting, military systems for 50 years. The people who know what they're doing, to get in there and harden the transformers, harden the SCADAs. It's not going to cost that much to do it, and come back every year to inspect it to make sure it's all been done right. It really is not that hard to do, but it's the politics of EMP. When I first started on this crusade back in 1995, when I left CIA and came over to the Congress and started telling congressmen about EMP, most of them had never heard of it, and we had the first open hearings on EMP, I thought, this is great. We'll pass a bill in 1995 and get the country protected. Then I can go on and do something else. Here it is, decades later. and we still haven't moved off the dime. I and most of the EMP people who are scientific experts, okay, we're not politicians, really underestimated that the biggest problem is going to be the politics of EMP, not the science, not the technology, not the money, and that has been a real hard problem to overcome. The utilities have got hundreds of millions of dollars to spread around, bribing members of Congress. But even there we've beat them, because we have gotten the bills. They've tried to stop us, and we've beaten them in every bill. But their last line of defense is the deep state. They own these people. There's, in one of my books called The Power and the Light, I named their names. There's like 6 people who are actually in the system. And if those people got fired, I think the other bureaucrats would lose heart, and we'd actually make progress. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the Trump administration to fire these people, and I was so disappointed in that, because I think one of the reasons most of us voted for President Trump was because he was good at saying you're fired, but he didn't seem to do that when he actually got in the White House. He did not drain the swamp, and that's the problem, and it doomed his presidency, in my opinion, because he was trying. We had a President Trump, but we still had literally an Obama administration. He was trying to run the country with the Obama administration, and it doomed his presidency, unfortunately. And maybe doomed all of us, because we're running out of time to protect against these threats.
Dr. Pry, how can people get your books? Do you have a website that people can go to? And what would you tell an average American who's watching this, who's concerned? Should they call their member of Congress? Should they write a letter? Should they? What's the best thing for an average person to do? And how do they get informed with your material?
All of that. I would encourage them to get my book, Blackout Wars. It's got a blank executive order in it. All you have to get your governor to sign that executive order and fill in the name of his state. It's got a blank bill in it. If you can get a state legislature to fill in the name of your state and pass that bill, it'll start your state on the path. Because that's an important thing for people to know. You don't have to, the whole country, you don't have to wait for Washington. Individual states can protect their electric grids, so you can keep the lights on in your state and survive. And we're going to make a shot at that. 2 weeks ago, I came from a meeting with members of the state legislature in Utah, and they've got a bill, and they're going to try to protect Utah. Texas has been trying to protect its grid. Maine has been trying to protect its grid. Florida, has got a movement afoot to protect its grid. And all this is healthy from another point of view, too. Not only do we need to survive this existential threat and not rely on the incompetent fools in Washington, who are never going to act on this or other things. But I think maybe it's a God-given opportunity to save our constitutional republic, because the founders never intended Washington to become a new Rome. The founders never intended so much power to be concentrated in Washington. Most governance was supposed to come out of local governments, and then out of the states, and then the least important thing was supposed to be Washington. This is an opportunity for us, for patriots, to claw back power from Washington. Just think of what the implications are, the legal and constitutional implications. If a state says, I'm going to take over this national security issue and protect my grid from EMP, and hell with you, Washington, that means that all lesser things below that also fall within the purview of states' rights, and that's one of the reasons we've lost our constitutional republic, is because the states were supposed to be sovereign under the original conception, and I think if we're going to survive, we need to get back to that.
Well, Dr. Pry, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your wonderful speech here. And I encourage folks, go get the book. This man knows what he's talking about more than anybody. So we'll be back with more. We're at the Red Pill Expo. I'm Alex Newman, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.